Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments, and keep up with our latest stories. Reactor status stable, holding at 91%. Radiation bleed from the stern array. Minimal, contained. We're clear. Commander Lucas Cade stood at the center of the Varjuna's bridge, his boots locked firmly against the carbon steel floor as the stars crawled past the viewport at an agonizingly slow pace. His features were sharp, carved by both age and the weight of years spent in the cold void. The dim, tactical lights cast deep shadows across his face, emphasizing the deep lines etched around his eyes. These weren't just the marks of age. They were the imprints of discipline, the product of long stretches of silence in the dark corners of space. Silence, once a shield, had become nothing more than a burden as they approached the unknown fringes of charted space. The weight of it was suffocating, and now, here, on the edges of everything, silence no longer offered any comfort. It was no longer a companion, but a reminder of how far they had drifted. "Maintain course. No transmissions," he ordered, his voice a calm but resolute whisper. It carried across the bridge with authority, and no one dared to question him. The Varjuna moved through Sector Hector like a ghost, its sleek hull cutting silently through a system recently claimed by the Rakshack Imperium. There were no patrol beacons, no comm relays, just empty space and the steady hum of the Varjuna's engines. The crew, what was left of them, moved like phantoms themselves. 14 crew members, and that was all, 7 years outbound. 2 supply ships swallowed by spatial anomalies, 1 hydroponic section shut down due to radiation seepage, and 1 suicide among the crew. They had stopped naming the months after Year 5. There was no need. Time had become meaningless. Cade had held them together with nothing more than protocol, order, and discipline. It was the only thread connecting them to the world they had left behind, the only thing that made sense in the chaos of deep space. "Commander," came the voice of Ensign David Torres from the side console. His tone was sharp, focused. "I'm seeing residual distortions, gravity spikes, subtle but consistent. Matches the signature we recorded near the alien expanse." Cade turned slowly, his sharp eyes narrowing as he studied the data. "Same frequency range?" Torres nodded. "Same pattern. Deep warping, low yield. It's active." The bridge crew tensed, the weight of their shared understanding settling over them. They knew exactly what those readings meant. It wasn't good. Not by any stretch. "Log it," Cade ordered, his voice firm but still quiet. "Encrypted black protocol chain only. We'll deliver it directly to Earth." "Aye, sir," Torres replied, his fingers dancing over the console as he began to encrypt the data. No one on the bridge celebrated the order. There was no joy in the work they did, no thrill of discovery. This was a ship on a mission, and this mission had just become much more complicated. "Crossing into Rakshack's perimeter in 43 seconds, Lieutenant Bramkin reported, his eyes glued to the navigation console. "They don't list this sector as interdicted." Nothing flagged. Cade's eyes narrowed as he stared at the display. "Visuals? Anything?" "Nothing," Bramkin replied, shaking his head. "But something feels off." It was that instinct, honed by years of service in the void, that Cade trusted most now. There was no logic to what he felt, but there was a deep, unshakable certainty that something wasn't right. The stars outside the viewport seemed almost too still, too silent. Up in the command ring of Ganvor Prime, Overseer Neral paced, his armor gleaming in the dim light. His bone-plated mask gave him an air of menace, his 4 golden eyes glowing faintly as they tracked the alien signals rippling through the surveillance grid. His armor, ceremonial yet deadly, gleamed red-black, jagged edges curling back like horns, a reminder of the might of the Rakshack Imperium. "Unknown signature doesn't match Council registry," Second Claw Rethar said, his voice a deep growl as his fingers darted across the control node. The crimson glyphs etched in magnetic ink glowed with an ominous light. "Pirate smuggler, eliminate." "It," Narl snarled, his voice low but filled with authority. The order was quick, decisive. Rethar hesitated, his clawed fingers hovering over the controls. It could be diplomatic. A patrol ship, perhaps? I said eliminate it, Naral growled again, his eyes flashing with anger. Now, the order cascaded through the command ring's fire control systems, and moments later, the sky above Ganvor Prime lit up with the intensity of 1,000 suns. The Varjuna shook violently as the first salvo hit, Cade's knee slamming into the console edge. Alarm screamed across every panel, filling the bridge with chaos. "Impact on dorsal array!" Torres shouted, his voice cutting through the noise. "Hull breach, decks 9 through 12, no warnings, no hails." "They just opened fire," Lieutenant Keene barked, gripping the navigation cradle as the ship was rocked by the second salvo. "Evasive pattern Kappa 12. Divert auxiliary power to inertials." Cade's voice rose over the din, cutting through the panic. "Get that shield grid back online!" But it was already too late. The second hit was even worse than the first, a solid core plasma lance that cracked the ship's spine like a whip. The Varjuna reeled sideways, venting atmosphere in a deadly spiral of ice and debris. Cade stumbled toward the emergency override panel, his mind racing. "Seal the decks! Move all hands to the lower quadrant, now!" he shouted, his voice a command, a lifeline. The crew scrambled through smoke-filled corridors, some dragging wounded, others carrying vital equipment. Cade moved with grim determination, pulling Lieutenant Bram Keene from a buckled wall plate, blood running from the younger man's temple. "Go!" Cade barked, shoving him toward the escape corridor. Behind them, Deck 10 collapsed inward in a violent, white-hot scream of metal folding like paper. "We've lost command array and propulsion control," Torres's voice crackled through the comms, barely audible. "We're not going to make it." A third hit slammed into the starboard wing of the Varjuna, and Cade watched in horror as 3 crew members were sucked into the cold void of space. Weightless, silent, and gone in an instant. He gritted his teeth, blood from a cut above his brow clouding his left eye. "The emergency beacon is already live," Cade muttered to himself. "But we need bodies off this ship." He turned to Petty Officer Juno Marin, who was already at the escape pod hatch. "Juno, get the pod primed." "2 seats working," she answered, her voice tight with urgency. "3rd, maybe. 4th, if we can do it." Inside the command ring of the Rakshack's fortress, Overseer Narrell watched the explosion bloom on the surveillance grid, a crimson sun blooming in the darkness. "Target eliminated," Rethar said, his voice slightly shaken. Naral flexed his clawed fingers, his expression unreadable. "Record it," he ordered, his voice cold. "If there were survivors, they'll drift. Useless. Beings clad in blood-dark metals. Their skin obsidian textured like carved basalt with tusked masks and backward-swept horns. The Rakshacks had built their strength through conquest. They saw victory as momentum, not consequence, a successful purge. Rethar continued, telemetry logs archived. "We suspect a rogue scout vessel, UNFL flagged, mismarked. At the edge of the chamber, a small figure moved forward. Robe, dark gray skin, pale crimson, long fingers wrapped around. Data scroll. Unlike the warriors, he wore no armor. Overseer, I bring you information." Narl's gaze sharpened. "Speak." The figure bowed. "I am Varys of the Scholarium. Crypta. I analyzed debris fragments retrieved by orbital scavengers. One panel bore this." He lifted the scroll and activated the hollow. The image spun slowly in the air above. Then a black emblem scarred and half-melted but still visible, an eagle with wings flared above a crossed star field. Below it, a phrase burned into Alloy Verification Force Humanity, Treaty, Zerol. The entire chamber fell silent. No one of the warlords breathed. "That can't be real," Vesh's voice trembled. I cross-cheat it with relic scans from the pre-accession era. Treaty 001 is its real. It's the first non-intervention pact signed by. The Council breach of it voids all protections, tension coiled through. Naral's plated limbs, the chamber's temperature suddenly dropping. Are you saying we struck? A treaty-class ship, yes. Exalted one. It was not a pirate, it was a patrol vessel. Murmurs surged through the chamber, then shouts, then fear. A grayscale general with obsidian tusks slammed his gauntlet into the war table. What will they do? Narkle did not answer at first. Then he said, they will not respond with words. Vesh nodded, eyes cast low. History shows they never do. Another voice, sharp younger, cut through the noise. The humans are scattered. They haven't marched in 1,000 years. The treaties a myth. A deeper voice answered from behind Warlord Dorak. The oldest in the room, eyes dim like cooling coals. I saw them once in the last years of the Hysa conflict. We deployed 67 ships. They sent 12. None returned. The silence deepened. Back in Vega, beneath the oceans of Earth's third moon, the last activation. Node locked into place. In orbit, a satellite flashed twice, red then blue, and vanished from civilian detection networks. On board the Ashuras, the crew executed recovery protocols. The encrypted confirmation ping arrived. Rescue authorized. Directive. Secure survivors. Return to command. No debates, no noise. The machine was awake. The wheels were turning. The galaxy had miscalculated, and Earth was already moving. The recovery pod clicked into Ashura's docking ring with a dull, final hiss inside the E. Medbay steam lifted from sterilizers as auto-rigs descended, hissing pressure against fractured suits. 4 stretchers hovered mid-air, guided by silent treads and precision arms. Commander Simon Ward walked ahead of them, face carved from stone. 2 of the survivors were bleeding internally. Petty Officer Marin had a collapsed lung and 2 shattered ribs. Ensenores showed no visible injuries, but his vitals were spiking erratically and his pulse registered combat trauma. The 3rd Bramkin had a skull fracture and a cerebral bleed. No time to wait for neurosaptic mapping. The AI authorized immediate nano-stabilization. And then there was Cade. He remained upright longer than the others tried to walk, refused a stretcher. Only collapsed when he saw the white floodlights of the medbay ceiling, and then the sedatives took him down. The first sound Lucas Cade heard was not a voice, but a low hum, rhythmic, almost mechanical, like a countdown that had forgotten its purpose. He opened his eyes slowly. The lights were dimmed. A soft blue cast across his vision. He knew right away he wasn't on the Varjuna. He sat up too fast. Pain exploded behind. His temples easy, said a voice, male calm. Cade turned his head and saw a man in standard old fleet black arms crossed at the edge of the room, white hair, deep-set eyes. I didn't need an introduction, Ward Cade muttered. The captain nodded. You're stable, but 2 of yours aren't. Cade shook, his head trying to push through the fog in his brain. How long? 6 hours since recovery. We pulled your pod before anything else drifted into the field. Cade wiped blood from the corner of his eye and stood. Bridgeward raised a brow. You should rest. I can't. Cade said, his voice was dry but steel-laced. Let's go. They walked the silent corridor side by side. No small talk. The Ashura had no noise to spare. On the liftward, finally spoke. We lost one from the medbay. Keen died on the table. Cade stared at the floor. His jaw moved slightly, but he said nothing. Ward didn't push. As they reached the command deck, Cade paused, taking in the low pulse of displays and the quiet precision of the Ashura's bridge officers. Ward gestured toward the central array. This is why I didn't give you a full debrief in the medbay. Cade stepped forward. The room darkened. A map unfolded in 3 dimensions, suspended in the air. Earth, Luna, Mars. Then further, Vega, Trappist, Cygnus. Dozens of systems pulsed red, not in warning, but in motion. Old hull tags flickered along the vectors. Tyrosas dreadnoughts, Arbalast heavy cruisers, Spectre line interceptors, all marked active. Cade stared at the wave of mobilization. "You're not repositioning." "No," Ward said. "We're reactivating CADs." Breath caught. Aranis Ward nodded. "Fully authorized within 10 minutes of your signal." Vega was first. Earth followed. Cade turned slowly, taking in the paths of human vessels across the map. How many assets? Ward hesitated. "Everything that still breathes." Cade looked down at his hands. They were trembling. "I didn't mean to trigger this." "You didn't?" Ward said. "The Rakshacks did." Cade closed his eyes for a moment. Silence. Then he nodded. "Take me to command." At the edge of galactic space inside the upper chamber. Of the Galactic Council, the atmosphere was brittle. Dozens of alien delegations flickered into their slots via hollow projection. Their forms ranged from the humanoid to the surreal jelly-veiled beings with soft glowing tendrils, carapaced warriors, seated on iron thrones, crystalline clusters refracting their language as pulses of light. At the central pedestal, High Envoy, Tava of the Rakshacks, stood alone. He was draped in ceremonial armor, edges like obsidian blades. His voice was urgent. "The humans are mobilizing without communication, without deliberation. We demand intervention." From the cluster of senior species, the Itari, the Akrani, the Dumatul, there was only silence. Finally, it was Doatul Speaker Granith, a being of waxy, segmented limbs and faceless plates who responded. The treaty was clear. Tarvives hissed. "They've remained dormant for centuries. They're fractured. No centralized government. Their fleet records haven't been updated in a millennium." A ripple of iridescent color flowed from the Ishtari luminary, its voice humming in layered tones. Their dormancy was never weakness, it was warning. More silence. Tarvish's claws flexed. "You would allow this retaliation without mediation." A metallic voice from the Hydrax coalition. Its speaker, a hovering, tri-lobed drone, answered flatly, "We will not intercede. We've seen what happens when humanity is provoked, and what is that?" Tarve spat. The room remained quiet. On board the Ashura, Cade stepped onto the forward observation deck. Alone, below him, stars uncoiled like a map of nerves. He watched without blinking. Ward entered after a moment carrying a secure data slab. Message from Earth. Command containment mobilization confirmed, fleet deployments expanding across 6 systems. Cade didn't react. His eyes stayed fixed on the stars. "They've acknowledged." "Your signal," Ward continued. "Your survival. It's shifting. How Command's approaching this. They're watching, listening, waiting to see what you'll do." Cad's hands tightened on the railing. No time for memorials. No chance to speak their names. Ward set the data slab down beside him. "Not now, but what's coming. It won't let anyone forget them." Cade stepped to the central panel, activated the hollow map. Red arcs traced from Earth toward Rakshacks territory. Thick lines of acceleration and convergence. Old designations. Old intent. He studied the movement, each formation snapping into place like a machine coming back to life. After a long moment, without turning, he spoke. "I didn't just return, Ward." Stayed silent. Cad's voice was low, steady. "I reactivated the final response." The lights of the Ashura dimmed to crimson as the ship passed into a high-velocity drift corridor. No broadcast, no flag, just silence and speed. Behind her, Earth's fleets moved. Like tectonic plates, massive, deliberate, and impossible to stop. Across the galaxy, systems flared with sudden awareness. It began in whispers, then full-spectrum alerts. On Bariman, the capital of the Rakshacks Imperium, panic became politics. The Senate chamber, once a bastion of unified strength, had devolved into open chaos. Over 100 officials, military intelligence, diplomacy, logistics, screamed across one another in a dome filled with the low-frequency pulse of emergency scans. Overseer Naral stood at the center, unmoving. His armor gleamed black and bronze under the vaulted ceiling's tactical display, now filled with red markers spilling in from human sectors. "They're initiating a containment pattern," growled War Minister Drev, slamming his clawed fist on the war table. "Flank, compression, sectoral isolation. We've seen it before. 3 centuries ago," spat diplomat Thalvin, his robes tangled from having been pulled back into the hall mid-protest. "You speak of memory, not relevance. Their formations don't need updating," Drevel snapped. "They perfected them before we had orbital travel." Another voice shouted from the rear, sharp and brittle. "Then we beg forgiveness. Send a formal plea to the Council cede territory. Surrender if we must. Silence, Neral," roared, his voice cut through the hall like a war horn. "You'd have us gravel before they've spoken a word." A heavy silence fell, broken only by the murmur of the data feeds. Thalvin stepped forward, defiant. "What matters is survival. If we kneel now, perhaps the humans will recognize." "They won't," interrupted Dravel. "They're not responding. They're preparing. They don't retaliate like us," Narol added. "They don't posture. They erase." The hall fell quiet again. One by one, the display updated. New human deployments. Dreadnought-class vessels emerged from hidden shipyards in TRAPPIST-6. In Cygnus Prime, forgotten orbital silos blinked green on long, dead channels. At the edge of Council jurisdiction along the neutral axis of the Rune Axis Assembly, a private diplomatic relay transmitted restricted traffic from human-controlled space. Ambassador of the Valari Enclave watched the stream unfold in silence. His form was serpentine, semi-aquatic skin patterned with living chromatophores that pulsed in shades of gray and violet. Next to him, Strategos Curran of the Vatun Collective. A scaled biped with reflective bone crests adjusted his projection filters. "They've activated old jump rings," Kren said. "Ones we thought were sealed." Hearth nodded. "And the Prime Dreadnoughts 6 online, maybe more. Hard to tell. Their EM suppression tech is unsettling." Another ambassador, Real Shin of the Crystalline Shrieken, clicked into the relay with a tone like fractured glass. "They will not occupy," Real Shin said. "Their movements show no staging for ground seizure. Punishment only." Arthur agreed. "No territory, no gain, just demonstration." Kren leaned forward. "Should we intercede?" No one answered. Then Hearth whispered, "There's an old saying among the deep orbiters of Earth's southern hemisphere. You don't poke a ghost if you don't want to meet its teeth." Within Earth's military continuum, First Containment Fleet was in full-phase activation. On the Trappist Moonforge decks, the VSSS Templar, a Tyros-class dreadnought, released from magnetic cradle after 280 years offline. Its systems came alive in layers, each sub-ruin tied to a doctrine too old to be in circulation. Each weapon platform polished by automatons, long forgotten by surface command. No crew cheered. The officers walked in silence, through echoing steel, taking stations with practiced mechanical. Steps Commander Deus Monroe stepped onto the command deck, a lean figure in burnished gray-black sash across his chest. Eye-shard and distant run primary drills. Full shield calibration, lock rail vectors for planetary suppression. This is a deterrence. BOP and target priority 1. Orbital control nodes, his exo. Lieutenant Dorian Gray nodded. "No civilian vectors authorized," Negative Monroe said, "per protocolo Arcanus. 0 civilian contact." "This isn't war, it's response," across Cygnus orbit. The VSSS Halberd and VSS Grenell formed the spearhead of Intercept Wing Alpha 12 heavy cruisers fell into tight formation, supported by squadrons of Spectre-class interceptors, old fast and deeply underestimated by most current species. They didn't broadcast their arrival, but every sensor on Rakshack's borders already saw them. Back on Barman panic, calcified into doctrine. The military high command pushed for full planetary shield saturation, cancellation of all diplomatic sea missions, and preemptive fleet consolidation, but the civilian governors resisted. Regional ministers, especially from the merchant sectors of Hadril and Tenmar, refused to support conscription policies, citing galactic overreach and council betrayal. The result: deadlock units pulled from transit orders, conflicting field admirals disconnected from chain of command. At the core of it all, Narl stood unmoved. "We brought this," he said to Dravel in a closed chamber, "and now we'll feel it." The Rakshack sent another request to the council, a formal emergency assembly. It was granted, and it failed inside the Great Assembly Dome as the projection of Narkal appeared alongside the translated voice of Chancellor Varjuna. Delegates remained silent. Dozens of species, hundreds of years of lore, and Notone lifted a hand. Naral's message was simple: the humans are moving. We acknowledge our error, but the scale of their response cannot go unchallenged. We plead for de-escalation. The council speaker, a hollow field of oscillating patterns that translated owner multiband feed, responded without inflection. No motion has been raised. No. Second voice has supported intervention. The chamber does not recognize a dispute. Then silence in orbit above Vega at Fleet Assembly Platform. Theta 9. The final units of Containment Group 1. Aligned for phase shift. 12 ships deep with dreadnoughts are the E. Spine and cruisers angled like spears. They formed a wedge across open space. Their sublight trails left no heat. Their reactors ran in silence. They waited in a remote chamber within the diplomatic quarter of the Nox Coalition. An old advisor whispered to his prime minister, a human ally from the pre-consul era. "They don't march for glory," he said. Voice hushed. The minister looked out the window toward the stars. "No," he answered. "They march to remind us who they are." The door to command assembly chamber. Epsilon opened with a hydraulic hiss, revealing a circular war room buried beneath the old Martian crust. Lucas Cade stepped in alone. Around the central table 5 men stood already in position. General Marcus V, Admiral Renair, CS Fleet Strategist Jonathan, Flake Rear Admiral Emmer Doss, and Colonel Isaac Wren, seated off to the side with a tablet active in his palm. No introductions. They knew who he was. Commander Cade Vi said, voice low and final. "Just on time." Cade didn't reply. He moved to the table eyes, scanning the hollow map rotating above it. The Rakshack's frontier dotted with heat blooms from activated Earth fleets, cross-hatched with predicted reaction zones. It was a surgical grid, not a war plan. V folded his arms. "You know why you're here. You know what was triggered?" Cade nodded. "Once I saw the fleet lines. The Council won't interfere." "They're paralyzed," said Admiral CS. "And the Rakshack's command is collapsing into silence. No one wants to speak first, and Earth will be the last to speak," added Doss. "We answer through maneuver, not media strategist." Hale tapped a section of the map. "We've spent the last 30 hours calculating the precision strike. Clean, controlled, Arcanist compliant. You were in the zone. You saw them up close. We need your insight." Cade said nothing. His face remained unreadable. The lines under his eyes had deepened. Lucas Phi said more quietly now, "You're the only living officer to face a Rakshack's volley and survive. You know their defense layout. You understand how they react under pressure. We've done the math, but we need someone who's walked through their fire." Cade looked around the table. "What do you want from me to lead?" A pause. Hale stepped forward. "We have 3 primary objectives." The hollow map zoomed in and shifted to a tri-sector overlay. First vector, strike industrial corridors on Ganchek's moons. We destroy their replenishment chain, refueling platforms, munitions arrays, orbital fabricators. No ground engagement, just silence the machines. The map shifted. Again, second vector, decapitation of command. Hit Barrackman, central logistics tier. Not the city, the uplink hubs, the coordination satellites, and the Inmosphere fleet reserves. We remove decision-making from the equation. A third change, third vector. Block all evacuation corridors. We deploy intercept wings along their predictable escape paths. We jam, isolate, warn, then eliminate if necessary. The point is control. No occupation. Cade murmured. "No siege, just disarmament." "Exactly," Hale said. "Punishment." "Demonstration?" Nothing more. Cade stared at the central marker. Ashura, designated as Nexus 1 Ward, had already signed the ship into operational command. Cade looked to V. "Why me? Because the Rakshacks didn't fear our ships," V answered. They feared our memory, and you just walked out of it alive. Silence. Then a quiet nod. I'll do it, in his private quarters aboard the Ashura. Cade stood alone in front of the old locker embedded in the rear bulkhead. Inside hung the uniform of the old fleet carbon fiber, weave dark gray with ink-black trim, the collar high and tight against the throat, a single stripe across the chest, no medals, no name. Here ached in and ran a hand down the sleeve. For a moment his eyes lingered on the empty cuff. He slid the jacket on, and then it began. Not memories, not hallucinations, just echoes, silent flashes behind the eyes. Ensign Bram Keen laughing with Torres over stale protein rations during the 5th year of patrol. Marin asleep at the diagnostics console, jacket draped over her boots, off face soft with exhaustion. The engineering chief, Harlan Beck, teaching 2 younger techs how to bypass thermal shunts with spoons and copper wiring. All gone. Kate adjusted the cuffs, each motion deliberate, each fold precise. He looked. In the small wall mirror, the reflection didn't look back. It stared at him. The Ashura's bridge stood ready. Captain Ward stood at attention as Cade entered. Behind him, Lieutenant Hal Breer and Communications Officer Clark. Quill turned in silence. Ward stepped forward and extended a data pad. Orders confirmed. Assure a designated flagship strike sequence under your command. All squadrons await your vectors. Cade took the pad, glanced at the data. 3-phase engagement. He said aloud, industrial neutralization. Command, dismantling evacuation denial fleets already aligned. Ward said, they're waiting on your mark. Cade looked over the crew, then he stepped to the central command node and set the pad down. This isn't for vengeance, he said, voice carrying across the deck. We're not here to burn cities, we're not here to raise flags. He looked up, jaw set. We're here to end a mistake. And then he stepped forward, stood beneath the glowing interface and spoke a final word. He locked eyes with Ward, prepare to jump. A flash of white ruptured the black between stars as 12 human cruisers, 4 destroyers, and a dreadnought breached subspace at once, straight from the gravity shadow of the Skandar star. No warning, no pulse wave, just sudden mass and deadly purpose Skandars. Orbital defense grid caught them too late. Inside the primary observation station on Skandar, Prime Lieutenant Varesh Kal of the Rakshack's defense fleet leaned over a data sphere as alarms screamed in 6 different tonal registers. 4 of his eyes adjusted focus mid-blink. The hollow map, twisted red markers had materialized directly inside the protected zone. Formation locked weapons, armed. Impossible Vez hissed. No heat trace, no approach vector. They just appeared. Impact confirmed in 5 said. Watch officer before the blast wave threw him against the bulkhead. Above Skandar, kinetic warheads. Tungsten-jacketed mag pushed velocity tuned to slice through shielding hit every major platform in the northern arc within 7 seconds. Each missile traveled at such speed that atmospheric sensors registered the explosions as simultaneous sonic events. Anti-orbit turrets began to rotate, but none fired. They were slagged before targeting systems initialized. Platforms didn't collapse, they vaporized. In the command chamber of the Ashura Cade stood firm, hand gripping the hollow table's edge. All units confirm. Vector 1 impact, rail telemetry. Clean reported, Lieutenant Brecker. Cade didn't blink. Proceed to Vector 2. Shift, spread 3 degrees starboard. Rotate formations. The fleet shifted in perfect sync, and over the fractured moons of Gansek, the second wave unfolded. 3 human cruisers, VSSs, Dominion, VSS Kalmar and VSS's Ardens broke from the spine of the formation, descending to low orbital trajectories. Railguns locked onto orbital fuel silos, docked weapon towers, and magnetic tether yards. Target set reported Commander Elias Monroe aboard the Dominion, disengaging safeties fire in sequence. The guns roared, soundless in vacuum, but brutal in effect. Streaks of metal carved luminous paths through orbit. They didn't explode. They shattered impact points with such force that entire stations simply unraveled. Silos buckled inward before collapsing outward, docks folded like paper, weapon towers toppled. Silently, their beams melting before they could light. The Rakshacks did respond. 4 interceptor wings scrambled from low-orbit hangars on Gangeek 2. Sleek, clawed ships painted in blood red, each with a forward-ramming prow and heat-seeking twin. Drives they moved fast, but not fast enough. The human interceptors were already in the zone, out of Cygnus vector. 6 Spectre-class fighters cut their formations in half, using a classic hammer anvil. 2 forward, with jamming bursts, 4 behind with micro-missile dispersion. The Rakshack ships banked to evade only to find they'd been herded directly into the path of hypercharged railguns. 2 of them disintegrated mid-roll. The rest never had time to break vector. On board the Ashura, the air was silent, no celebration, just breathing and calculation. 3rd vector intercept initiated Sedward. Enemy evac traffic detected on long-range arrays. Civilian classes excluded, prioritizing command craft underlay beacons. Cade studied the updated map. Fleets were pulling back toward Barraman in disarray, but 6 narrow corridors, older, less patrolled jump lanes had lit up with outbound traffic. They're using secondary escape paths. They think we don't track relic lanes, we do. Ward said engage, intercept wing, Bravo and Delta order. Staggered funnel formation. No chase corral, them into fire lanes. Lieutenant Quill relayed the order. Moments later, on the edges of Rakshack Space 24, interceptors formed an arcing grid, layering jamming pulses in overlapping spheres. Navigation failed. In seconds, the fleeing ships panicked, tried to scatter. That was the mistake. Quill's voice was quiet. Tactical feed confirms. Targets isolated. Transmission blocked. We're receiving a broadcast request from one of the military craft. Shall I patch Cade? Shook his head. Send the message. Quill nodded. The transmission went out in all directions on all bands. Short, brutal, unmistakable. Punitive operation in progress. Demilitarization executed in a subterranean command room on Bari Command Rakshack's High. Strategist Durlock slammed his claws into the granite console, cracking the surface. Where are our destroyers gone? Said his second eyes wide. They never fired. The humans struck first. No posturing, no hails. Dlock bared his fangs. What kind of people don't? Even announce their assault from the shadows behind an old war priest. Spoke voice, rusted face, hidden behind a cracked bone mask. The kind who trained for centuries in silence. In orbit, the Ashura held position, hull lights dark. The rest of the fleet, aligned around her like the teeth of a trap. Cade looked over the final report, fuel silos destroyed. Command tiers offline, escape vectors collapsed. He closed the display and set the data pad aside. Ward stepped forward. Orders. Cade looked out the viewport. Skanda was just a blue-white glare in the void, know its orbital belt reduced to dust. Maintain formation, hold fire, await confirmation of enemy surrender. Bria nodded. All systems locked. Fleet is steady. The stars outside pulsed faintly. The last light of weapons fire fading into stillness. Cade remained still. Silence was enough. The light above Barman shifted high in orbit behind the shattered remnants of Rakshack's relay satellites. The human fleet emerged from blackout mode. No war cry, no signal. Just quiet convergence. 12 cruisers, 4 destroyers, and the Ashurarat, the center, running cold. On the surface, capital defenses stirred into last-minute motion. Alarm towers blared across the volcanic ridges, shield arrays hummed under strain. 3. Planetary defense squadrons scrambled from underground vaults, their launch shafts erupting steam and ash as warships clawed toward the upper atmosphere. Inside Rakshack's command spire, strategist Durlock stood hunched over a flickering tactical grid. His forearms trembled slightly as lines of red arced toward their orbital lanes. "They're not stalling," he muttered. "No psychological maneuver, no spread deployment, they're coming straight through." General Menazes' obsidian armor pitted and scolded, stomped into the chamber horns, scraped and blackened. We hold formation Delta, reinforce node arcs on hemisphere east, shield all comm centers. Durlock shook his head. We don't have time to shift into Y. Delta. The drones are still rearming. We need another 30, they'll never give us 30. He was right. From the bridge of the Ashura, Cade watched the last stage of orbital rotation complete. The Rakshack squadrons were trying to realign spreading formation. In a classic dome, a textbook defense one that had a fatal window. Noe said executing hinge ward, confirmed human cruisers dropped into a shallow crescent arc. Then they pivoted not to flank but to punch. They surged mid-rotation, targeting the precise moment the enemy ships transitioned between close and wide formation. It was a hit between breaths. The first salvo tore into the edges of the Rakshacks, flanks slamming plasma drives and reactor cores mid-cycle. The ships lit up like flares against the black, rupturing inward before their formation was complete. Sensor silence fell over Barman's uplinks. Human rail gun platforms had disabled coordination towers with high-penetration spike rounds, the planet's central command satellite's proud discs of gold and bone blinked out in 3 consecutive pulses inside the Rakshack's command bunker. Durlock's screen went blank. "Where's the fleet?" he demanded. "Offline," his second whispered. "No tactical links, no visual telemetry. We've lost command." Continuity, then we move to manual fallback. "We can't," the second said. "They've cut atmospheric relays, we're blind." Outside, the last defensive wings spiraled uncontrolled through upper orbit, reacting too late. Isolated, unable to realign, human interceptors carved through them in silence, breaking formation with near-psychotic precision. Each hit was exact, no drift, no overkill. 29 minutes from initial engagement, the Rakshack's defense grid collapsed. In a charred corridor deep beneath the capital's palace, the final session of the war, tribunal convened. Overseer Naral sat rigid, his helmet removed, claws wrapped around a fractured war staff. His armor still bore the dust of the council steps. High strategist Durlock entered, last blood streaking one side of his temple. "They're holding." Orbit Durlock said. "No ground assault, no atmospheric pressure. They're waiting." A junior officer, slender young silver-edged armor, stepped forward, voice shaking. "Perhaps if we transmit formal surrender." Narrow's eyes narrowed. What the young one didn't. "Step back. A broadcast apology. Recognition of violation. If we do it now, we may." The back of Narl's hand hit his chest plate with a brutal clang. "We do not beg." Durlock exhaled. "We already lost. Now, it's about what's left." The room fell still. After a pause, Naral turned his gaze toward the table where the surrender protocol beacon waited, unused since the Yavkon purge. 4 centuries passed. He stepped forward, pressed his hand to the beacon. A single pulse escaped into the void. On the Asher's Bridge Breer, looked up from his station. Incoming burst encrypted by council standard codes. Origin Barrackman government node authentication confirmed. Cade said nothing, just extended his hand. The data pad glowed. A single line of text rolled across it. Military surrender. Issued ceasefire requested. No further transmissions. Ward stepped forward. Orders. Cade nodded once, acknowledge, no reply. Cease all offensive operations. Begin reformation. Ward relayed the commands, one by one. The human ships peeled away from orbital. Firing positions. No celebration, no descent. No banners. In perfect sequence, they formed a withdrawal ring, not of retreat but closure. Hours later, on the ceremonial floor of the Galactic Council, the Rakshack's representative appeared. He was not Narali. Was younger, less decorated, armor scraped, but intact. He stood before the council as a hollow echo, shoulders bowed, voice flat. "We submit record of our violation. We surrender fully without condition." No species responded as their representative turned. To leave, he passed the human observer node. It was dark, unoccupied, a silent screen where once long ago a flag had stood. He paused. "I am sorry," he said, not to the chamber, but to the console. From behind, a gray-skinned elder stepped forward, hand on his shoulder. You do not say that the elder hissed. Not Tutham, but the young one didn't answer. He only walked in orbit. The Ashura drifted through the last of the debris field. No engines active, just momentum and position. Cade stood alone on the command deck, watching broken plating float past. The view frame, old alloys, charred insignias, shattered helms. No motion, no light status. He asked quietly. Bria responded. Voice steady. System secured. All targets neutralized. No violations logged. No pursuit orders. Pending. Ward stepped up beside him. No occupation. No contact. Just closure. Cade didn't reply behind him. The fleet hovered in perfect silence, above Baron.